welcome back to the Conifer Wood. This video is going to be on the character design for Osum. If you remember from a while back when I was designing Sally, there was a sort of drawing section where I was working out her design fully. It's going to be a bit like that. So it's going to start with a couple of sketches, then I'm going to move on to a few more detailed versions of what she could look like exploring the options, and then finally I'm going to produce a model sheet from which I'll base all of her clothes design and model all of the sort of technical proportions and things like that. Anyway, let's get right into it. So you might remember from the first character design video that I did on this channel. When I was first sketching out the characters, I did a page on Sally and I also did a page on Osum, which is what this one is here. And at the time I think I landed on somewhere in between these three characters here for Osum. I talked about a femme fatale kind of figure. I wanted to contrast her against Sally as a sort of calm and collected, but also quite stubborn character, whereas Sally would be quite new, quite naive. So I took the ideas from this page and moved on to another couple of pages of sketches. These are just portraits, as you can see. I feel like with portraiture you can get quite a good idea of what that character's personality is like just through their expression, the way they do their hair, their sort of makeup, things like that. And also in animation, or in fiction in general, you can kind of display their personality with their features, like the way that they look determines how they act like, in a way that you don't really get in reality. So I was sort of playing around with the features here, and definitely a lot of hairstyles as well. I did this one first, and as I drew this haircut here, I sort of realised that that is sort of the thing that I want to do. I want it to be quite swoopy, probably not as long as this, a bit shorter. People with the sort of personality that I'm looking for in Osum, I feel like in media they tend to have closely cropped hair as opposed to longer hair. There's obviously exceptions to that, but that seems to be a general trope that I'm sort of willing to play into a bit. So on the second page here, they've got a few sort of shorter haircuts, whereas this one it tends to be a bit longer. I really liked this one here, because it has that same kind of swoopy effect, but is that shortness that I wanted in there. I think generally this page is also a bit more successful with the facial structure. This one is a bit sort of all over the place, but this one here I'm kind of honing in exactly how I want her to look. And it is pretty much this last row here that I was really satisfied with. I quite like this one as well, and a couple of ones from the top here as well. I like this one. But this hairstyle here, and I think possibly the way you can just about see what she's wearing over her shoulders, that sort of thing is what I'm aiming for here. In this section I'm going to be talking about a different method of character design that I've been trying with Osum. When I was designing Sally, I was using quite an analytical way of developing her personality. So if you remember, I had this array of portraits that I was using to introduce differences between her facial structure and her haircuts to kind of get closer to an idea of what I wanted her to look like. And then when it came to her fashion, I had her in a single pose and then dressed her up from there. But with Osum, I wanted to sort of combine these two things, introducing variations and trying out different clothing, as well as using her pose as a way of developing her character as well. Because as much expression there is in a face, there is also that much expression in the way that someone uses their body, the way that they hold themselves, and their poses that they strike. This method is also a tool for developing the character, so I started off with a vague idea of how I wanted Osum to be like. In the very first sketches that I did right at the beginning, I had her as a kind of stern and solid and confident personality, and I wanted to add nuances to that. So that's quite a one-dimensional personality, but I think there could be more in Osum that could be expanded a bit more. What I was trying to do was expand the boundaries of how I thought of Osum as a character, because it's quite easy to get stuck in the way that you think of the characters that you design from the very beginning. It's easy to sort of put them into a box and then they can never quite escape that, because that's how your brain conceptualizes them. Whereas by drawing them in various different clothes and expressions and poses and things like that, you start to think about them in different contexts, and that allows your brain to sort of open up and allow differences to what you'd originally considered to sort of infiltrate your idea of what they're like. And this is definitely what happened with Osum in this exercise. This process of drawing is not always entirely deliberate. What you draw is not always the same as exactly what you intended to draw. So with Osum I had this sort of personality in mind, but I allowed my hand to sort of draw different things that introduced different kinds of personalities into this Osum that I had sort of developed in my brain. So as I draw, sometimes I end up drawing things I had not imagined that I would have drawn originally. It goes in a certain direction and it keeps going in that direction without my brain really thinking about it too much. And this chaotic nature of drawing sometimes sparks new ideas in the direction that I want to take Osum's character. It allows for more opportunities for different things to happen. Sometimes when I'm drawing, I find that there's something that doesn't quite work with the way that I've drawn everything else at the time. Like, it doesn't quite work in context, even if it is something that I had originally thought would work. So often with the poses, I'll sort of sketch out something and decide, oh, that's not quite what I thought Osum would be posing like. So I'll get rid of that and start something new and try something different. And also with like the clothing and things like that, I'll rub things out and try something new and try different colours, things like that, because it doesn't always match. The choices that I make when I'm drawing don't always go with the direction that drawing is taking. And none of this is deliberate. I'm not sort of pre-planning the arc of my drawing, but somehow it starts to build itself up into its own little character. And when you introduce certain things, like certain colours or certain items of clothing, they just don't quite work. A good example of this is all through this, you might notice me trying to put in these hot pink colours. And this is coming from a piece of material that my mum sent me to make clothes with, and I really like it. It is this hot pink, slightly plasticky material. I'm not quite sure what to call it, but it feels like you can make a raincoat out of it or something like that. And I really wanted to use it in Osum's design because I didn't get a chance to use it for Sally, but I just could not get it to match any of the drawings that I'd made. For whatever reason, that colour and that material just didn't go with the vibe of the Osums that I had drawn, even though I was trying desperately hard to get it to work. So interesting things like that can happen, and I feel like the character sometimes takes on its own sense of self in a way, like apart from what my brain is telling my hand to do as I'm drawing. It feels like sometimes Osum is developing her own personality and telling me what I should be drawing. So this method is essentially trying to introduce minor differences, or mutations you could call them, into Osum's design to try and sort of broaden my horizons on what she could be. And I think this has been quite effective in this, as you'll see the array of different Osums that I've drawn here. Although they have a base personality, they all have some kind of connection between them. They are acting and posing and dressing in quite different ways, and you can imagine each one of them is their own distinct personality, even if that distinction is only quite slight. And I think that's where this method has been quite successful. Something that I've discovered from this has actually been that the original Osum that I thought I would want in this animation, so in this picture of them all together, the second Osum here is sort of the one that I thought I would be designing as I came into this. She was the one that was in that first sketchbook. But actually what ended up happening was my favourite Osums were the one carrying the box thing and the one stretching, the second from the right. With these two ones that I really like, there's a slight softer edge to Osum. She's not quite as stern as what I had originally intended. And I feel like this personality could vibe quite well with Sally as they interact on the outpost. I sort of got some inspiration while looking at reference material on Google of like skaters in LA, and they have this kind of like relaxed, breezy kind of aura to them, I suppose. The way they dress and the way they stand on their skateboards, it's a bit more detached than original Osum was. And I really like that. I really like that kind of idea of this slight drifter personality. I think that works with what Osum is. She's a courier in this. She's sort of going from outpost to outpost delivering things, and it's a fairly autonomous job. She doesn't have too much oversight from what the sort of higher-ups in the company want her to do. She can go around and chat to everyone in the outpost, and she doesn't have too much responsibility in sort of maintaining them and making sure that she catches the sparks and things like that. All she has to do is just to give them their provisions. And I think that kind of always travelling, not too much responsibility in her job, lends quite an opportunity to explore this sort of LA skater vibe. So I think that works really well, and that was definitely not something that I had in mind for her when I was first drawing her. But I really like it, so I'm going to be continuing with this style into the next section when I do the model sheet. And hopefully by then I'll have like quite a clear idea of how I want Osum to be. So this is the Osum that I ended up with. As you can see, she's got that casual look that I was talking about in the previous section. Baggy shirt, plain tee and jeans, and really low-cut tennis shoes. I gave her glasses too as a bit of an afterthought, but once I'd drawn them, she just didn't look right without them, so they stayed. Somehow they modified her expression quite a lot and brought it further into that laid-back personality I was going for with her clothes. Maybe it's the shape or the colour, but in any case I think they really brought the look together. When I was drawing this, I was thinking about how her faceplate would be taken on and off. In a lot of the sketches, her messy hairstyle went over her face, so if I wanted it to be part of the headpiece, it would probably get in the way of that action. So I moved her hair away to the sides while trying to keep that wavy look, which I think worked out pretty well. I also made her stockier than Sally. She's about half a head shorter and a bit wider too. This is partly because I thought this body type would fit her personality better, but also because I wanted some variation in shape and size between the two, to avoid them having two similar silhouettes. Talking about Sally, I was trying to make Osum's clothes contrast with Sally's, the reds and browns here as opposed to Sally's green, black and yellow. The original blue jeans I had for her I thought might get a little bit lost in the setting, as I'd been planning on making that white and blue, if you remember all the way back to my second video, I think. This way both characters pop out quite naturally from the background, which I think will be quite important in the final cut. Something that I noticed when I had this finally all drawn up was how Osum's clothes imply a very different kind of weather to Sally's. Whereas Sally's suggests cold and maybe a bit wet, Osum's is from a much warmer climate. I think it would be fairly rare for an Atlantic fisherman and an LA skater to both feel comfortable in any one place wearing what they wear. This might be something I address in their voice lines, like Osum saying how she doesn't feel the cold or that she's underdressed for the weather or something like that. Or I might add a few things when I come to make her clothes, like adding socks and making an overcoat. Either way though, I don't think it'll be too much of a problem to fix later. So yeah, that's all from Osum for now. I'm pretty pleased with how this design ended up, even if there are a few things that might need tweaking in the future. She's definitely not what I had imagined when I started, as I've mentioned, but I think that the process brought out a much better result. Next episode I'll be modelling her in Blender and printing her as well. I'm not sure there'll be too much to show for that, so I'll probably throw in some extra bits like working out how the hair is going to work for both Sally and Osum. Anyway, that's enough from me today. Hope to see you in the next one.